Hello and welcome to Code Tutorials. In this video, we'll be taking a look at the Fixed Project Slider widget from the Qi Addons for Elementor Premium plugin. With this widget, you can create effective presentations that display not only your visuals but convey relevant information about them. This is an example of how this widget can be used. What we see is just an animated image that serves as a preview. You can see this design up close by checking out the link under the image. It will take you to a demo homepage belonging to the Qi theme. But you'll also be able to see this design during the course of our video since I plan to recreate it for the coming tutorial. And if you keep scrolling down this page, you'll find a bit more information on the Fixed Project Slider. This is something like a feature highlight section, just to let you know that there are a whole bunch of options that will let you customize different aspects of this slider. And speaking of those options, we're about to see what they are. We'll start by heading over to the back end. Then, in the Elementor sidebar, search for the Fixed Project Slider. There it is. Drag it over to the page. Okay, here. It's a bit squished now, but I'm going to fix that. Using the navigator, click on the section to open the options for editing it. In the Layout tab of the section editing options, you'll want to change the content width from box to full width, and switch the columns gap to no gap. With this, we've allowed the widget to stretch to the full width of the screen and removed any empty space that may have been left over. Alright. With that done, we can start looking at the widget options. Click on the Fixed Project Slider, either on the page or in the navigator, to open its options. The first thing I'll do here is switch the slider autoplay from its default setting yes to no, which will disable it. Just to be clear, this is a great option to have and I do want to use it for my slider, but it's going to keep things moving while we're looking at the options, so it's best to temporarily disable it and keep all the changes I make front and center in the video. Also, we have the option under this, slide duration, which I'm going to circle back to at the end of the video since it's connected to the autoplay. And the same goes for the slide animation duration option. This brings us to the enable slider navigation option. If we look at the page, we can see that we have the navigation arrows. Actually, we can see the left arrow, but the right one is hidden behind the navigator. Let me move it. And there it is. Now that I think of it, I don't think I'll be needing the navigator again, so I can actually close it. And we can go back to the Enable Slider Navigation option where I can switch the setting to no, and in doing so remove the navigation arrows. You can combine this with the autoplay for a more streamlined look. However, for the design I'm making, I'll switch the navigation back to yes. Next, we have the Image Proportions option. You have this drop-down with a variety of settings to pick from. Which one you opt to use depends on what kind of design you have in mind. For my part, I'll stick with using original because I have specifically prepared images for this slider and this setting will let me show them off. The option after this is Enable Responsive Under. Here we can pick the screen width that will serve as a breakpoint after which the responsive settings will start to adjust the slider display. I'm going to set 768 pixels, which is broadly the width of a portrait orientation on tablets. After this, there is the Enable Full Height widget option. With it, we can set our slider to stretch out and cover the full height of the screen. I want to do just that, so I'll switch the setting here to yes. Perfect. Now we come to the Items section. There are 3 by default, and each of the items represents a slide in the slider. Although the slider currently has placeholder content, each slide has corresponding item options that allow us to fill it with different images and text content. However, what I plan to do here is I'm going to customize the first item, which involves changing the image and text with my own. Then I'm going to hop over to the style options to adjust the colors. This will help me keep the content I add clearly visible. After that, I'll come back here and duplicate my first item to generate additional slides. This way, I get to keep some settings the same throughout while changing the content. So it will help me save time. Alright, that's the plan. I'm going to delete the bottom 2 items now, so I'm left with just the first one, which I'm going to customize. Click on it to reveal its options. And the first of those options is the image. That's this dummy image on the page. And that same image is what we see here on the right as a sort of sneak peek. That's just because I have one slide. If I had multiple, each would show a preview of the next slide's image. So when I click here to replace the image and choose the one I want, then select, it will appear on the page in both of the image areas. Next, there's the title field where we can replace this text on the page. I'm simply going to type over what's already here. There. After that, the next field is for replacing the text. I'm going to delete the dummy one and add my own. This will take a moment. Hang on. Okay, there we go. Then we have the button text field. It's for a button that will be placed approximately here, under the descriptive text. The button is not going to appear until you add a link for it. Basically, until you give it a purpose to exist. I'll adjust the button text first. There. And then I'll set a hash symbol for the button link. This will serve as a replacement for a proper URL. And there, the button has become visible. With that, my first item or slide is done, and I can proceed with my plan and go to the Style tab. Here I need the Style section. Click to open. And using the first option here, background color, we can set a new color for the slider background. Whether you use the slider or add a hex code, it's incredibly easy to pick a color. Since I have a specific one I want to use for my design, I'll add the hex code needed to get it. Alright, but that's not the end of my color changing. I want to adjust the text color as well. I'm going to do that in the Content Style section. The options that will help me do that are title color. You can set anything you like and it will immediately appear on the page. For this, I'm going to use plain black. Okay. Then we have the text color. It's for this descriptive text here. I'm going to set a new color. It's going to be the same plain black that I have for the title. So with these color changes, my text content is much easier to see. But now that I'm here, I might as well go through the rest of the options in this section before returning to the Content tab and the work of making additional slides. Right above the title color, we have the option to change the title tag. Since I'm making my slider to be a full page element, I'll set H1 for my slide titles. Then above that, we have the title left offset. It allows us to move the title more to the left or the right. I'll switch to using percentages as the unit of measure here. This will make for an easier adjustment on smaller screens. And I'll set -40% as the value. The negative value will push the title a bit to the left. Okay, let's see what else we have in this section. We covered this, and now we have the title typography. It represents a bundle of options that allow you to change various aspects of the title's typography. Firstly, we can change the font family for the title. There are hundreds of fonts to choose from. Then we have the font size, if we want to make the title larger or smaller. Next, there's the font weight. The values range from thin to bold. Simply choose any of the settings that works for you from this drop-down. After that, we have the transform option. It lets us turn the title text to uppercase, lowercase, capitalized, or keep it normal, which is however it was typed in. I'll switch mine to uppercase. There we go. Following that, there's the style option, which we can use to change the text style from normal, which is our default, to italic or oblique. Then the decoration option lets us add a line under, over, or through our text. And finally, the last three options here, line height, letter spacing, and word spacing, can help us make any changes to the spacing in our title text. That's it for typography. I'll close this. Under the typography, we have the text color option, which we covered already. So the next thing we have is the text typography. It's the same collection of options we just saw, only these will apply to this text here. So I'm not going to go over them again. I'll simply make the changes I need and we can carry on. And those would be the font family. I know just the one I want. Give me a moment. There. Then I'll set 16 pixels for the font size. Okay. And other than that, I just want to increase the line height to 27 pixels. That's all. I'll close the text typography. Underneath it, we have one more option, and it's for the text and button padding. It serves to adjust the space around the text and the button, specifically for its left or right side. because, as you can see, only the right and left fields are active. I'll click here to disconnect the two fields and then I can change them individually. I can set 40 pixels for the right side while leaving the left unchanged. And this got me a buffer of space to the left of the text and button. Okay, those are all the options we have in the Content Style section. I'll go back now to the Content tab so I can get on with creating additional slides for my slider. So we left off at the Items section. To create entirely new slides, you can click on Add Item. But given that I want to preserve the style settings I made while only replacing the content, the easiest thing for me to do is duplicate the slide I completed. That's done simply by clicking here. And now when I open this new item, we can see it's identical to the first one. Since we already covered how all these options work, I'll skip ahead with the video while I go through them, replacing the content and making additional slides this way. Here we are. I finished making my slides. There are 6 in total. If I start to move through the slider, you can see that they all have different images and text content while retaining the style settings I made previously. Looking at the slider now, it's easy to see that while we have a slide's main image on the left, the preview on the right belongs to the next slide's image. And not only that, the slider is looped, so visitors can click through it. They don't have to backtrack if they don't want to. Alright, that wraps up the general content settings. We can take a peek at the button settings now. They'll help us adjust this button here. A quick note before we dive in. The options you see here are typical button options. Since the button is not the focus of this video, I'll make the adjustments I need without going into exhaustive explanations. However, if you'd like to see in-depth coverage of these options, you can check out the key button video tutorial linked here. Now back to the settings. For button layout, I want to use textual. This cuts down on the remaining options. We are left with the possibility to enable a button text underline, which I want to do for my design. And those two options create the button look that we see here. Moving on to the next section, we have a field where we can upload a button icon. This icon will be placed next to the button text and positioned either on the left or the right, depending on how you set it. I don't plan to use this for my button design, so let's move on. The next section we have is the developer tools. It contains just one option. If you switch it to yes, it will show the widget in the form of a standard WordPress shortcode, this light gray text you see on your page, so you can easily copy it for use elsewhere on your site. I'll set this back to no. Okay, this is followed by the help section. Here you'll find links to some helpful resources should you need them. And that's all we have in the Content Options tab. Let's move on to the Style tab. The first section here will help us sort out the look we want for our navigation. So we'll primarily be looking at these navigation arrows. And to start with, we can change their position. By default, they're set to inside, so they're placed within the slider element. But we can move them to the outside. In that case, the navigation arrows will be placed outside the slider. I'll open the navigator to show you. Then quickly go to the section settings and switch my content width to boxed. There. With this narrower slider, we can see the arrows outside of it. So, if you're using a boxed page layout or a slider that is less than full width, then this is an option for you. However, my design includes a full width slider, so I'll set the content width back. Okay, let's return to our examination of the style options. Actually, wrong style. This is for the section. Let me close the navigator first so it doesn't bother us, then click on the fixed project slider on the page to reopen its options and get myself to the appropriate style tab. So we were looking at the potential navigation positions. We saw inside, outside, and now we have together. This is the setting I plan to use for my design. It places the navigation arrows next to each other. And when the arrows are together, there are a few additional things we can set for them. For example, we can pick their alignment. Currently, it's set to the left, but I'll move mine to the right. Okay. Then we can pick the navigation vertical position. By default, it's placed at the bottom, but we can move it to the top, so it puts the arrows here. I'm going to stick with the original setting for my design. After this, we have the space between arrows option. It's used to separate the arrows from one another. You can see how, when I drag the slider, the arrows start moving further apart. For the value here, I'll set 38 pixels. Next, we have the navigation vertical offset option. It allows us to move the arrows up or down within range of their given position. For this, I'll set 40 pixels. And then we have a similar option, the navigation horizontal offset. It lets us move the arrows a bit more to the left or the right. Primarily, it's there to move the arrows away from the page edge. In my case, it's the right side edge. Anyone who set the navigation alignment to the left would be looking at the left page edge. Here, I'll switch to using percentages. And then set 8.6 as the value. There we are. I have a bit more space here now. Following all these options, we have two fields, navigation arrow previous and navigation arrow next. This is where we can replace the icons used for the navigation. These fields give you access to the icon library where you can choose from several icon packs to find the icons you like. Alternatively, you can upload a custom SVG, which is what I plan to do. This is the arrow I'll use. Insert media. Okay. And now I'll do the same for the other arrow. There's my icon. Insert media. Alright, replacement done. After the icon fields, we have a few options that are somewhat related. The easiest way to show them is to first set the navigation background color. I'll pick something at random. This is fine since it just needs to serve as an example. I don't plan on actually adding this to my design. Now that I have a background color set, it will be easier to see the effect of the options I'm about to show you. The first is the navigation holder width. It's there to adjust the width of the space that contains the navigation. This option will treat our arrow icons as a unit. So if I start to move the slider, by tracking the background color, you can see how the space changes. And the same goes for the navigation holder height. When I start moving the slider, we can see how the holder grows. And it's important to note that neither of these options will affect the arrow icon size. That's set separately. Okay, so now that we have this rectangular background, we can style it further. For one, we can add a border to it by choosing a border type from this drop-down. I'll set solid, for example. Then give it a width. 2 pixels will do. There, we now have a border framing the holder space. You can, of course, change the default border color. Make it lighter or darker. Pick a specific shade of a specific color. It's all up to you. Now, under this, we have the navigation border radius. FYI, this option would work even if we had a background color without a border. But since we're exploring the border settings, it's going to be even easier to show you the radius. Simply put, it allows us to curve the corners of the holder space. So if I set, for example, 20 pixels, I will create these blunted corners for my rectangular background. Carrying on with the options, we have a section where we can toggle between setting the style when the pagination is viewed normally and when it's being used or hovered over. Under the normal options, we have the navigation arrow color. It comes with this familiar color picker so you can easily set whatever color you like. However, I'm using a custom SVG arrow icon with the color already determined within the graphics parameters, so I can't show you what a change might look like. If I try, you can see the color stays the same. Again, this is due to the specifics of the SVG I'm using. Any icon from the icon library or a custom one that allows color change will reflect whatever setting you make here. Let me reset the option. And the same goes for the color option that you'll find under hover. This one here. A regular icon would allow you to pick a color that would appear once you hover over it. But my custom icon has all of this already defined, so I can't, and don't need to, make any changes. Let's get back to the normal options. After the arrow color, we have the navigation arrow background color option. This has nothing to do with the holder color. Rather, it's just the color that would cover each of the arrow's backgrounds, no more and no less. Let me demonstrate. I'll set something random. Okay, and if we look at the page, we can see this new color appearing only behind the arrows, and leaving the wider space, i.e. the navigation holder, around them unchanged. Let me switch to a lighter shade so it contrasts more. There. And we have something similar in the hover options. So the navigation arrow background hover color option allows us to set a different color, let's say this, and have that color appear only while we're hovering over one of the navigation arrows. And while we're looking at the hover settings, the last option in this section is one you won't find in the normal settings. Enable hover arrow move. It's a simple yes-no choice with the option set to yes by default. It creates this animated movement effect that makes the arrows shift sideways when we hover over them. However, we can switch it to no, and then there will be no movement when we hover over the arrows. I'm going to switch this back to yes as I plan to keep the effect for my design. Looking at the rest of the options we have here, I'll skip navigation arrow size for the moment. I want to explain the last two options. So the navigation arrow holder width is for adjusting the space that contains the individual arrow icons. Unlike the previous holder width option we saw, this, although it applies to both icons, will treat them as individual elements rather than a single unit. You can see that when I start to move the slider. The arrows' backgrounds grow wider. You can expand them past the arrow's width. And the same goes for the navigation arrow holder height. You can use this option to change the height of the space holding the icons. Alright, I'll undo all these changes I've just made. I needed them for our show and tell, but they aren't part of the design I'm making. Give me a moment while I clear everything. I've made a lot of changes to the options here, so this is gonna take a moment. Oh, let's not forget this. Delete this, and that too, and done. Now, I skipped one option while explaining everything, and that's the navigation arrow size. It's very straightforward. It allows us to change the size of the arrow icons. I want to make mine bigger, so I'll set 46 pixels here. And this is the look I have for my navigation now. Neat and simple. With that, we're done with the slider navigation style section of the options, and we can check out the style section. The first option here should be familiar. I used it earlier to set the slider's background color. Besides the color, we have the slider left offset option here. By increasing the value, we can increase the amount of space separating the content from the left page edge. Please note that the unit of measure is in percentages. Here I'll set 4.1 to reduce this gap and give my slider content more room to stretch out. After that, we have the content width option. It concerns only the text content, this area here. It won't affect the slider as a whole. When I start moving the slider, you can see how the space containing the text expands. The default setting has the option value in pixels. So this width is 382 pixels, and it's also the amount that's been taken away from this image on the right. Without the content width, the current slide and the upcoming slide images will be right next to each other with the text placed over them. I'm going to clear this change so I can switch to percentages as the unit of measure and set 21 for the content width value. This will get me a slightly wider space for my text content. Alright, moving on. The next option is the padding, and if I set, for example, 20 pixels here, it would create a buffer of empty space all around my text content, but within the width we set using the previous option. And as you might have noticed, this also shifts the text, so you can use the padding option to fine-tune the text position if you like. For my part, I only want to move the text a bit down, so I'll clear this, disconnect the fields, and enter a value for the top padding only, 70 pixels, which will create this empty space and push my text down. And that's it in terms of the options under Style. Our next section is Content Style. I'll open it, but as you might recall, we already covered all the options here while styling our text content. So we can move on to the section after this, which is Spacing Style. As you can see from the names of the two options here, this section is for adjusting margins that would come into effect when the responsiveness settings are engaged. This is just to give you added control over how you want the text in your slider to look. Generally, you don't have to worry about this. Each of the Qi Addons widgets is coded to be responsive and designed to look good on various screen sizes. Additionally, you can use the Elementor option at the bottom of the screen if you want to make specific settings for a range of different devices. But circling back to the options here, the title margin bottom on responsive and the text margin bottom on responsive allow us to adjust the amount of space here under the title and here under the text. This is, as I said, to give you more control, given that we're all likely to have different amounts of text here, which would affect the overall slider display. So, in case you need them, these options are here for you. Alright, let's see what's in the next section. In button style, we'll be able to adjust the look of this button text here. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the button has its own separate tutorial that you can find linked in the description below. So if you need more detailed explanations of any of the options, please check it out. For this current video, I'll briefly touch on each of the options while making the changes I need for my design. Our first option here is typography. When I click to open it, we can see the same collection of options we've seen before. Here, I plan to change the font family for the button text. I have a specific one in mind. Let me find it. Okay. And I'm going to transform the text to uppercase. That's all I needed here. I'll close the typography options. After that, we have the switches between normal and hover options. Under normal, there is text color. If I pick a new color, it will change both the text and the underline. If you'd like to keep them separate, there's an option for changing the underline color alone that we'll see in a bit. I'll clear this. And switch over to hover, where we have the text hover color option. It's pretty straightforward. If I set a new color, it will appear once I hover over the button. Alright, I'll clear this and close this too. I want to keep the default color settings. This brings us to the button icon style section. You have several options here for styling a button icon, provided you added one in the Content tab. Since I haven't, I'll simply carry on. But again, if you need explanations on any of these, please check out the button tutorial I've linked below. And actually, I could say the same for this next section, the button inner border style. Since I'm not using a border, I don't get any options here as I don't need them. And last but not least, we have the button underline style section. The options here will help us style the line under the button text. Right at the top, we have the switches for normal and hover options. Before we start going through them, I'm going to change the underline width. It serves to adjust how wide, or how long if you want to think of it that way, the underline will be. I want to keep my line clearly visible even when I hover, so I'll switch to percentages here and set 100 as the value. And I'll do the same in the hover section with the underline hover color. Switch to percentages and set 100. I'm doing this because currently, if I hover, the line seems to disappear. By entering 100%, the line won't shrink down and will instead stretch to its full extent both when viewed normally and when hovered over. Alright, let's go back to the normal options. At the top, we have the underline color. It lets us easily change the color just for the line drawn under the text. As you can see, it leaves the text unchanged. I'll clear this. And we can examine the version of this option that's in the hover section. I'll use a different color, green for example, and pick a shade. Now if we look, the line changes its color only once we're hovering over it. I'll remove the change. And we have one more option in the hover settings, and that's the Enable Hover Underline Draw. It's set to no by default, but if we switch it to yes, we'll get an animated effect on hover. This is it. It makes the line seem to disappear and reappear. I plan to keep this for my design. With that, we're done with the normal and hover split. The following three options are more general settings for styling the line. There is an underline offset. It lets us move the underline closer to or further away from the button text. The larger the value, the closer the number will be to the text. I'm going to leave it set to 6, so I have this look for the button. After that, we have the underline thickness. It lets us set how bold the underline will be. So it can be something very noticeable, like this, or something more subtle, like the default setting, which I want to restore. Okay, there. And our last option here is the underline alignment. If you set an underline width that's less than 100%, meaning it wouldn't cover the full length of the text, then you can use this option to determine how that shorter line will be aligned. Whether it will be more to the left, the right, or the center. As it stands, my line covers the full length of the text, so it has nowhere to go. So, changing the setting here won't have any effect on my button. Okay, those were all our style options. But we're not done yet. I still have the autoplay and slide duration options that I skipped. They are at the top of the Content tab in the General section. First, I'll enable the slider autoplay again. This will have my slider rotating in a loop, and visitors won't have to trigger it in any way to get it moving. One of the options that goes with it is slide duration. With it, we can set how long each slide will be displayed before being replaced by the next one. The default setting is 5000 milliseconds. I'll replace it with 4000 so you can see the slider sped up. This will make the overall rotation much quicker. And the other option that goes with the autoplay is the slide animation duration. It's responsible for the length of the transition between slides. The default setting is 800 milliseconds. But if I replace it with 100, let's see what the difference would look like. It should make for a more abrupt switch. There, the transition between slides is far sharper. I'll erase this to restore the default setting and leave the duration at 4000 milliseconds. This is the design I was working towards, and we're looking at the completed slider. All the images and text I added are here, and if I try the navigation, it works just as it should. Handy for anyone impatient to get to the next slide quickly. So my job here is done, and I can click on Update to save my work. As a reminder, before we finish up, you can find the design I used on the widgets page. You can preview it here and follow the link under the image for a closer look if there is any element of it you'd like to copy for your own design. Alternatively, you can create something from scratch that would serve as a truly bespoke solution. Whatever you decide to do, the information from this video should help you make it a reality. We've gone over how everything works and explored the various option settings you can use to create a variety of different looks. Overall, we hope you found this tutorial on the fixed project slider widget from the Qi Addons for Elementor Premium plugin helpful. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions that you'd like to share with us, please drop us a line in the comment section below. Also, make sure to subscribe to our channel and be the first to learn about any new tutorials and theme guides that we post. Thank you for watching.